So I'm happy to welcome you to this event of this capacity building hub dealing with the city water resilience and building urban water resilience. So I hand over the floor for Martin Schuler, please.
Thank you very much, Matti. Very pleased to be here this afternoon at COP24. Very pleased for the invitation to speak at the Paris Committee on capacity-building. We'll be taking you through an introduction to some work that we've been undertaking for the last 18 months or so, looking at the city water resilience framework, in particular looking at the interaction between cities, catchments and basins. So this work has been kindly sponsored by the Rockefeller Foundation and the Resilience Shift, and we've got a number of partners who've made this work happen, and it's been very much a collaborative approach. So we're going to explain a little about understanding about city water resilience, try to understand the factors of resilience, and looking at those key determinants that we need to build from. So the first part of this work you'll hear about is effectively the diagnostic, understanding those stakeholders involved and then taking it through to action. As part of this session, we'll also have an interactive phase where we'll ask our audience to participate and work through some of the questions we'd like to pose and help build through a collaborative approach the framework. So you're all part of this, so thank you very much for attending today. So I'll hand over now to Inigo, who'll take us through. We will then have a quick Q&A session, and then we'll have a couple of workshop activities which will help us build the city water resilience framework. Thank you very much.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Martin. My name is Íñigo Ruza-Milanes. I'm a senior consultant at Arup. I'm a civil engineer as a background, and today I'm really representing the core team of Arup that we have been working for the last almost year and a half in the city water resilience approach, city water resilience framework. For those who don't know Arup, well, Arup is an employee-owned engineering and consultancy firm. And this is quite important because really what it makes us be employee-owned is that really we can follow the values that we really want to pursue. And the core value that the old men there of Arup set us from the first was really to shape a better world. And we have been doing that for the last 70 years, and we have been succeeding to it. And that's why now we are almost 40,000 engineers all around the world in more than 34 countries. And following that value of shaping a better world is what it took us the challenge of develop this city water resilience approach. By fortune, we didn't do this by our own. We have been incredibly lucky, and first of all, by getting the funds and the support of the Rockefeller Foundation and the Resilience Shift. But not only that, we have been extremely lucky to work with incredible good partners that have been helping us develop this. It has been special mention to SIWI, to the Stockholm International Water Institute, that has been helped us to develop all that governance part of the water, as well as the 5 cities, the OECD, and of course, 100 resilient cities, who has been one of the key partners as well in developing all this approach and this framework. We come here to talk about water resilience, but this effort hasn't started yesterday. It's more than 6 years now that Arup started investing loads of money, and again with the support of the Rockefeller Foundation, to really understand what means resilience, in particular for cities. We started to develop the City Resilience Index in 2012, and since then our effort has been increasing and developing. We also developed the Design with Water approach, that we'll talk later about that. We have been helping private companies to understand what resilience means for them, and even for water companies. We have also been helping, for example, Welsh Water. We developed the City Resilience Framework, and that was used by the Rockefeller Foundation to create the 100 resilient cities. And with them, we have supported almost 30 cities in developing the resilience strategy all around the world. And it's all that expertise and understanding of what resilience means that make us thought that water was one of the key issues for resilience in cities. That's why, well, almost 2 years now, we started contact again with the Rockefeller Foundation, and we started this incredible project. So, why water resilience? Well, I have highlighted here some figures that really highlight the amazing challenges that we are facing in relation with water. And climate change is highlighting all these challenges. And they are really emphasized with the growth of population in the world. It's really affecting by the urbanization, and it's really consumption when it's making all these challenges even bigger. I think that the figures talk by themselves. And climate change in particular is having a massive effect on water. We see the trends, and it's not only that we are getting longer periods of drought in many places around the world, but it's also that we are getting much more intense rains in a shorter period of time. And it's that extremicity that is really affecting the entire globe. I work personally in many projects in Africa, in rural parts, in Uganda, for example. They don't really understand what is climate change, but they talk to you. They say, the seasons are changing. They don't know when to see it. They are really being affected by this, and then suddenly they get a massive rain that they didn't expect that is washing out all their land. So climate change is there. I think it's the right forum to say that, and nobody does it here, but it's always good to keep emphasizing that. At the moment, it's almost 2 billion people that live in a water catchment, and they are suffering for water scarcity. And there are predictions that say that 2050, these figures could double. In the opposite side, there are billions of people that live by the sea, and that they are going to be affected by sea rise level. We were just 2 weeks ago working with the Dominican Republic, starting to develop a country resilience strategy, because the climate change and the sea rise level, it can affect pretty much one of the key areas of development for the country, that is the tourism. It's really affecting all the nature, and also they can see in the neighbor, in Haiti, whereby deforestation and the consecutive rains, they really have a desert where they still have a big forest. So the figures are there, and we believe that water is fundamental for resilience. We believe that you're not going to achieve resilience without having water resilience. And certainly you're not going to get water resilience if you don't think about water in a holistic way. If you really think about water in the catchment aspect and understanding all the interdependencies that the water system has with the rest of the system in the city. And that's why we have created that bigger circle that we have there, where city resilience really depends on water resilience, and at the end you need to understand water resilience at that catchment level. And now the question, why cities? Well, a part of the continuous figure of people moving into city, what we really believe is that water is the blood of the city. It's really the underpinning system that feeds into all the rest of the systems. And if we look at the SDGs, that is super clear. It's not only water that talks to SDG 6. At the moment that you start scratching a little bit in the rest of the SDGs, it's pretty much in every single of them. And if you talk to the SDGs related with cities, even more. We have SDG 11, even 10, even 8, and of course, on the 13. And we understand cities not just as that urban red line. Cities go beyond that. And the water system is the exact example of that. We need to start looking at water, even if it's affecting the system, from the very beginning of the source. Where are your water reservoirs? Where are they coming from? Most of the times they will be coming from actually an outside catchment, but it's still really being part of the city because we're going to depend on that. And looking at the 3 key areas of the water cycle. So not only the access to water, but the sanitation and the drainage and the risk of flooding. And what we know, because we have been working in cities for 70 years, is that water is interlinked with all other city systems, with the economy, with the food, with the energy. We have been studying for the last year and a half how really all these links are interdependent and how these cities systems work together. And because we have been working for so long with different cities, and you will see that the developing of this is part of a co-development with 8 different cities, we know that cities are very different, and you cannot consider cities all the same. This is just a clear example of flooding but it's very different in Manila than it can be in the UK. And what is more important, we have been researching and understanding what are the factors that help or hinder to overcome those shocks and stresses. And it's very different what it will help the UK to move out from a flooding than what can help in Africa or what can help in Asia. All these factors are different, and every single city and every single society works different against different shocks and stresses. So, after seeing all these things for quite a lot of years, we thought that it was really a demand to develop a framework that would really understand what water resilience means in cities. And we create this challenge. How can we help cities provide equitable, safe, and reliable water resources and ensure protection in place from water-related shocks and stresses? Well, as you can see, it's quite a big challenge. But big challenges, in the end, you need to solve them by creating a methodology, but having small parts that you can solve, and by doing it with the right partners. So we created this methodology. We divided kind of in 3 parts, where the first one was a deep literature review, where we would be looking at the different factors, shocks, and stresses, and we will see it. Then from that literature review, we will do a gap analysis, and we will fill that gap analysis with the work that we will be doing with different cities around the globe. And after all of that data is what it will serve us to create the framework, the clear framework to understand water resilience. So, just very briefly, those are the key objectives, how we started the research about water resilience. This will be key to understand later on what are the outcomes that we are going to present today. So the first one was really to understand what at a global level and at a city level, the trends, shocks, and stresses are. The second one was to understand the factors of resilience. So what things help or hinder the cities and society to overcome these water issues. The third one, it was, okay, what really water resilience means for us, and let's try to create a definition. The fourth one, very interesting, was, okay, so what is really the city boundary when we talk about city and water? Like, is that going to be defined by the rail line or the governmental line of the city, or it's going to go beyond that? And who are the actors that participate on the water system? Who are all those stakeholders, and at what level they are? Then we will see also what is the governance, how is water being governed, because it has so many different levels, and as we were saying, it's like so interlinked with many other systems that it was very interesting to understand how the water is governed. And finally, of course, we wanted to know already what is out there. We know that people have been working on resilience and on water resilience. So for us, we didn't want to just start from scratch. We really wanted to build on all the different work that was done before. So we were come back and we were starting to review the different resilience and water resilience framework tools and methodology that they were out there. Some of the key findings that we got out from these objectives were that it's a very good global understanding in terms of water trends. And we were able to identify, just from literature review, at least 23 shocks, 60 stresses, and 28 trends of how we globally are going towards water resilience. It was kind of different at the city level, actually. It's not that clear how the global shocks and stress affecting the city level. Then we were also looking for those factors of resilience. As I was saying previously, what things help or hinder the cities and their inhabitants to overcome these shocks and stresses. And just on literature review, and from more than 50 sources, we found 750 factors of resilience. And we were saying those factors, they were already very linked with water governance. And almost like more than half of them, they were showing some link with water governance in order to help or hinder to overcome these shocks and stresses. Then, when we start to look for frameworks, what we saw is that the frameworks need to be action focused. There have been so much research and academia about resilience, but cities are really looking forward for something that they can take them from the assessment to an action plan. And that was fundamental for us, and we will see now how we had to shift our project from creating just a framework, an assessment framework, to creating an approach. And we will see how that approach and other tools have come as part of that project. And finally, we saw that a framework by itself sometimes is not enough, and that you need to have that methodology to implement that framework and a certain key tools that are going to help you to understand that framework and to apply it to the city. So very briefly, those are some of the key findings that we heard. And if you remember, one of the objectives was also to try to define what was water resilience. Well, this definition has had for, I can't remember now how many iterations, but I'm just going to read now the one that is the latest version that we have. So we define urban resilience as the capacity of the urban water system. And we understand urban water system, everything that includes the human, the social, the political, the economic, the physical, and the natural assets. And it's the capacity of that system to anticipate, to absorb, to adapt, to respond to, and to learn from shock and stresses. And these are very linked to the qualities of resilience. And all this is in order to protect the public health and the well-being of the natural environment, and of course, the economy, for minimize the economy disruptions on the city and the citizens. So this is the definition, quite conceptual, that we're working on. So as you remember, the next steps from those objectives were the gap analysis. And we managed to group them in 3 key gap analyses that will be fundamental for the next outcomes. So for the first 3 objectives, we defined that the real gap was understanding really what is urban resilience. And that is what we have been doing kind of like in one of the biggest efforts, like really understand what is water resilience. The second one, it was related to that scale, to that boundary, what is actually the city water basin. Normally, when you work in city resilience, you are really restricted by the red line, the government line of your city. But that is not really how it can work in water. Like the water system go beyond that. And the water governance and responsibilities and roles really go beyond the city government, and you have to make, as we will see later. And final is that we really needed to develop an implementation methodology. Every single person that we were talking with, every place where we were reading, he was saying that it's not enough to just create another framework that talks about resilience. You need to have a methodology of how you're going to assess that and how you're going to implement it. So these are the key 3 gaps that we found from the literature review, and that fed us into our fieldwork strategy. So as I remember from this, we started the contact with 100 resilient cities, and we opened a competition for them to partner with us to fill these gaps. So we got like around, I think it was 20 applications, and from them we choose as a first wave 5 cities. So in the first time we were working with Mexico City, with Miami, with Cape Town, with the city of Hull in the United Kingdom, and with Amman in Georgia. And the work that we were doing was raising so much interest that cities will keep coming to us. Like, we really want to be part of this effort. We really want to be co-developing this thing because it's what we're doing. So we also put additional funding to work with Manchester, with Rotterdam, and with Thessaloniki. All these cities, except from Hull, they are part of the 100 Resilient Cities network. And just very briefly, for those who are not very familiarized with these cities and the water shocks, stresses that they face. So we have Amman. As you know, one of the key stresses is water scarcity. But in the same time, one of the key shocks that Jordan suffers is for like very big flash flows. So they have this dichotomy where they have like a lot of water stress, but also like massive flooding. And also they have many stresses, as all the refugee influxes, about the governance of water, about Amman being really the center of the country and taking almost all the water resources of the country. So for example, we were seeing that the water catchment from Amman, it was the entire country in itself, and that was quite interesting. In terms of factors of resilience, we saw that because they have loads of funds, they have an incredible good system for managing water and having loads of data. And they have very good response system. So they're really doing their best. And that plant, for example, is an example. That's a wastewater treatment plant that pretty much, I think it treats 80% of the country. I think it's 95% run by renewable energies. So there you have a good example. Hull, it's a kind of a medium-sized city in the Midlands of the UK. It's by the sea, and it's one of the key examples of cities that they are going to be affected by sea rise level. I think it's more than 50% of their assets that are under the level of the sea, and they very often suffer for flooding. A few years ago, they have a massive one. One of the most valuable factors of resilience of Hull is that they have created this living with water partnership, where the city, the national government, and the water company are working together to have a common vision towards water resilience. And that is really working. So at least they are working together, they have a common vision, and the efficiencies that they are winning, they are like implementable and example for the entire world. And that is one of the reasons why we're working with Hull as one of the 8 cities that we have in the country. Mexico City was one of our biggest challenges. For those that don't know very well Mexico City, it's a city of more than 20 million inhabitants, and it's pretty much in a bowl. So it's a closed catchment, and in 1500, when the Spanish arrived, it was actually a whole series of lakes that then they were empty. But the problem is still being the same. I mean, even they empty every time that it rains, it's a bowl that has very little outflows, so it creates this flow. And in the same way, if you need to get water from it, well, it has a very big aquifer, but certainly for many, many years, it has been constantly overtaking water from it, which is having loads of effects on how the city is settling and infrastructure, but also it's a massive energy stress because they need to pump water from 2 different catchments, and because it's higher, the energy consumption is crazy. The factors of resilience that we found there, it was much more related with the community and little NGOs that they are helping them to do, for example, rainwater harvesting. So for example, in the last earthquake that they had, the communities that they were more poor and more affected, and normally they have less access to water because they have rainwater harvesting. They were able to thrive having water just after the earthquake, when the newest developments were like without water for many weeks. Miami is a similar case to Hull. It also has more than 50% of their assets under the level of water, and well, Miami is an example of how data can be super valuable to take decisions and how governance is like super smooth, and they are able really to improve and put a lot of investments in living with water. And finally, Cape Town. One of the most interesting things about Cape Town is that we were running the agenda setting workshop because they are part of the 100 resilient cities about, I think it's almost 2 years ago. And at that time, when we asked them like what are the key shocks and stresses of Cape Town, nobody said that water stress would be a shock or stress for Cape Town. Less than 6 months after, the entire city was in the news of all the world because of water scarcity. So that's why when we often talk about shocks and stresses and how resilience is like the capacity to overcome to that, it's not just really to overcome to the shocks and stresses that you think you're going to have, because shocks and stresses can come to you like completely unexpected. And the belief is that you are resilient to this holistic approach. You will be resilient pretty much to any shocks and stress that they are going through. Well, Cape Town, what has demonstrated as a key factor is the capacity of the society to really move into that and start saving water. And I think the Day Zero campaign has been globally known, and it's been a massive success. So that kind of work was going on for almost 4 months. We were spending more than 2 weeks in each of these 5 cities. We were doing interviews, focus groups, workshops, loads of site visits. Really one of the best part of it. I mean, one of the mandates from our steering committee is where you're going to city, you need to talk with the people, you need to visit the site, you need to talk with the people who are really resilient, with the lower community that they are affected by floods. And that's what we were doing. So I think, again, the figures talk by themselves, and in the end we were making the numbers, and it's more than 700 people that we get in contact during the 5 missions that we run. Okay, so after all this, let's go back to where we were in the beginning. We have these 7 objectives that we were looking at. We identified those objectives to do a gap analysis, and we used the fieldwork work, the strategy, the fieldwork work to fill those gap analyses. And that is really now fitting into the outputs that we're going to present. So from that understanding of water resilience, what we have created is the City Water Resilience Framework, and we'll explain in detail. That is really the framework, the tool that is going to be to allow you to assess the water resilience of your city at a very detailed level. That is where all the knowledge of the shocks, the stresses, and the factors to overcome from a very holistic way are produced. Then we were having this issue of defining the city water basin, and we didn't know that this was going to be part of our project. But we thought that it was so relevant that we decided to create this online tool called Watershed that we will see now in a little bit. And finally, the implementation methodology. Again, a task that it wasn't really in our scope, but that we thought that if we wouldn't create this, we would be failing. So we decided again to define what should be this approach, and at least in the first 2 steps, to do all our effort to develop the tool to be able to implement it. And we have called it the City Water Resilience approach. So now, very briefly, I'm going to go through the 5 steps, and we'll explain a little bit more in detail the first 2 tools. So the City Water Resilience approach, and I was mentioning, it's a 5-step approach that helps city from stakeholder engagement and the city assessment to assess the resilience and to create an action plan that it can be implemented, and then it can be assessed and managed. It's the basic of it. It's nothing extremely new in what is the steps of it, but we were getting like the demand from the cities that they needed these clear steps and the tools attached from that. And there is where really the difference comes on the tools. So from that first step, for the engagement, the stakeholder and understanding, we developed Watershed. And Watershed, it's coming to help cities to solve the problem of defining their water system and both their natural and man-made assets. And not only that, it tried to focus on what is the relationship between these assets, how do they interact, and how they are really affected by shocks and stresses. So with this, cities can create their own water cycle, can map all the different stakeholders, can identify the key shocks and stresses, and can visualize how this works, who are relatively true, and start to identify where are gaps and where are overlaps. And also, who are going to be the stakeholders that need to be more in contact, or who are going to be more affected by different shocks and stresses. So we have a visual video now that I'm going to play. It's just 5 minutes, but I think it explains much better than. We developed that tool to really help the first step. That of course will include another activities and the engagement with the different stakeholders and a series of workshops to understand. And when you have all this understanding of what is your water system and who are all the actors engaged and involved and how they interact, the second step for us is the assessment of the urban water resilience. And that is really where the City Water Resilience Framework kicks in. And that is really where the whole value of the research can start helping you to understand in which areas are you doing better, in which areas that you need to improve, and how you're going to plan and create projects to improve that situation. So again, a little bit demonstrating how we have created this. So we were having around 750 factors only from the literature review. And from all the data analysis that we took over different field missions in the 8 cities, we identified another almost 600 factors. So this is like a big list of more than 2,000 factors that we started to analyze and that we started to digest and to really understand and identify what their means and how that can help or hinder to develop goals and sub-goals for city water resilience. So from a first run, we moved from these more than 2,000 factors into 84 sub-goals that then they were combined into 12 goals, and then these 12 goals, as you will see, they are combined in 4 key dimensions. And we identified that the dimensions, they really talk in the same way that they talk the City Resilience Index. So these key 4 dimensions are equally valuable for city resilience and for city water resilience. So after doing that, we validate all this data again with our 8 cities. We created a 1-week event of very hard work in London. We call it the Global Knowledge Exchange, where representatives from the 8 cities, but also representatives from the World Bank, from OECD, from what other organizations? 3 or 400 cities was there. We all sat together and started reviewing all the data analysis that we have done after the field missions. And that was 1 week of very hard work with a lot of inputs from people from very different layers and from different perspectives and from the very different contexts. So after that, we had another almost 3 months of hard work to collect all that input and to really develop the final city water resilience framework that we're pretty much introducing today and that we are going to make it public before the end of the year. So for those who are not really familiarized with the City Resilience Index, the structure is quite similar. I was explaining this framework is represented in a way of a circle that has 4 dimensions, that is the highest level of understanding resilience, and these 4 dimensions, they look at water resilience in a very holistic way. It has the first dimension, that is leadership and strategy. We will see later what that looks like. The second one is planning and finance. The third one, we call it infrastructure and ecosystem. And the final one is health and well-being. Well, these 4 dimensions are divided in 12 goals. Sorry, 5 minutes. Okay. So these 12 goals, we're going to see it now, and they are again divided in 57 sub-goals. And itself, it will have a series of qualitative and quantitative indicators that will be used to really evaluate 25 minutes. Now, you just have another 5-10 minutes, and then we can really start the conversation that's going to be quite valuable. So, this is just the way how the framework is distributed. One of the interesting changes that we have from the City Resilience Index is that we have identified certain goals that they don't fit exactly under one of the dimensions, that they are just between 2 dimensions, and we will see why is that and why they really fit. So we have slightly shifted some degrees to the left, and now they are more combinable and they talk to each other. So the first dimension, leadership and strategy, is the dimension that defines the need of a vision and a common understanding at a leadership level. Okay? It's really where the core city needs to have a vision and a common plan, and that can work together. And we have defined there 3 goals and 1 goal you will see always. The goals in blue, they make reference to both dimensions. The first one, and I think all the team is really happy about this, is empower communities. We decided to put empower communities at the top of the framework because they are really the base of the framework and of the resilience of the city. Everything that is done in relation to resilience needs to be guided by the need of the communities, and they need to be very interlinked between themselves, and they really need to have a strength. Based on that, the second goal is a strategic vision. Very often, there is lots of conflicts between different parts of governments, and water is the perfect example from that. different interests, different goals are driven to different visions. And this what tries to have is like a common vision from all different parts of government and levels. And that is quite linked with the third goal, that is a coordinated basic governance. And this coordination, what is important to understand, is that it's coordinated at a vertical level, so it's at a city, at a national, at a community level, at a basic level, but it's also horizontal. It's not just the water system that needs to be coordinated and have a vision. It needs coordinated with the urban planning, with the energy system, the transport, with the waste. So it's really when you have this coordinated basic governance, when you're really going to have a common vision and you're going to win effectiveness. The second dimension is planning and finance. Is the next layer for planning. So in order to do that, in order to be able to implement that vision that we were mentioning in the first dimension, you really need to have effective regulations and accountability. So that regulation that you have, it actually can be implemented and it can happen in reality. You need to have an adaptive and integrated planning. And we see, because we are talking about resilience, about shocks and stresses, you need to have flexible planning. And you need to have plans that they are transversal again. And we need to find the commonalities, so the projects that you do, they are not only benefiting the water system, but other systems. And in the same way, other projects that maybe they're not necessarily guided by the water system can also improve the resilience of the water system. And finally, it's very important, they need to be sustainable funding, they need to have sustainable funding and finance. And this is talking really to the economic plans. One of the key needs that we always get when we go to the cities is like, yes, we have these amazing plans, but they are there in the drawer, and we never find money to be able to implement. And this is one of the key values that we want to raise with the city water resilience approach. A great approach and a tool that can really help cities to leverage funds to implement these projects based on this assessment and this approach. So those are the three key goals that talk for the planning and finance dimension. The third dimension talks about the infrastructure and environment of the city. It talks both about the natural and about the man-made assets. So the first one of the goals that we have under this dimension is the effective disaster response and recovery. If we talk about resilience and water resilience, many people, they go straight direct to disaster response. And we accept that is one of the key issues and one of the key goals for resilience. But it's not the only one. But it's there and it's one of the most important. Then you need to have an effective asset management. And this talks to all the projects, and they are both natural and man-made, that you need to create and that you need to maintain in order to help the citizens to thrive and to live better. And finally, you need to protect your natural environment. So, in order to have and be able to create good blue, green, and gray infrastructure, you also need to protect your natural environment, because that is really what is going to assure you that you have enough resources to thrive through all these different shocks and stresses. So these are the three main goals that we have identified: the infrastructure ecosystem, the effective disaster response, the effective asset management for that combination of gray, blue, and green infrastructure, and the conservation of nature of the nature environment. And the final one, the one that really looks at the people, at the citizens, the one that we have called health and well-being. Well, the first one is equitable provision of essential services. And here again is where we see that this overlap between these two dimensions is very clear. Because what we are talking is like, you need to provide those essential services for the users, for the citizens of your city, but you're really going to get that if you have good infrastructure in place. So that's why it's between these two places. And you need to have a goal that is healthy urban spaces. This really talks about a very big variety, and you can look it on your papers for the different sub-goals that they have. But because we are planning and we are talking about cities, it really talks about the way of how you're going to incorporate water in all the development and in all the plans of your cities. And finally, to having prosperous community. And this is link again and attach to empower communities. But this doesn't talk about the economy, as we were saying, in the second dimension. But this talk about the opportunity for citizens to be able to have to gain well-being and to be able to preserve the resources that they need to generate economic growth. And I think that's it. That it hasn't been a little bit of explanation of what we have been doing for the city border resilient assessment.